In a rapidly shifting society, now more than ever, it is essential to stay grounded. Balance is key, but harmony is better. Here, we provide the keys to tap into the divine masculine without sacrificing the divine feminine, because confusion not transmuted becomes confusion transferred.
This is Divine Masculine Activated, a weekly Tuesday evening tap-in brought to you by Mastermind Connect and curated by the good brothers J.D. Weatherspoon and Courtney Grange. We invite you to grab your activation method of choice, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and bring your whole self into this space.
So we live, baby. What on?
Yes, we both.
Boys, girls, chickens, goats, elephants, and all aspects of the animal kingdom in between.
Welcome to the All Black Magic School Bus, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, we are here to drive you through another episode of Divine Masculine Activated. I am Courtney Grange.
Yo soy el jefe.
El jefe, el mundo.
Raimundo.
I've been hanging around y'all way too much for that to flow so smoothly for me.
Hey, man, you know the vibes. I'm wearing a vibe better today. I'm channeling my inner Cuban uncle.
Yes.
About to go dance barefoot, you know, after cutting some chicken
in the backyard.
Already.
While you booming, I'm consuming mango juice under Polaris.
Listen, I'm looking through the window. The season, sir. 3 more weeks. 3 more weeks. People already getting into fights. Like, yo, you took my mangoes off my tree. Like, it's serious business. But anyways, that's not what we're here to do. Mm-hmm. What are we here to do?
We are here today, ladies and gentlemen. We have a special guest for you all that is going to assist us in this travel on this Alt Black Magic School Bus today as we move into new and uncharted territories surrounding peace and harmony. Yes, the play on words is important, and you will soon see why. For today's guest, JD, if you would be so gracious as to let us know, or let the good people know who we have here today.
All right, Peeper. Today's guest is the illustrious, the inspiring, the insightful, and the generally badass, you know, and she has great taste. Well, she, doctor, has great taste in eyewear. Frank always dope. Seriously, we'll see in a second. But anyways, Dr. Thomas, head of formerly USC. As of recently, that moniker has changed. You'll hear from her in a second. But her mission, their mission, is ultimately to revolutionize the way that social workers, service providers are empowered to not rescue or fix or solve the world, but how to really arm people and to turn them into warriors who go out into the world and really apply like a radical sense of humility, but also courage and simultaneously empathy. And enough of that, because I'll let this genius tell the rest of their story on their time. But without further ado, Dr. Shanéa Thomas, please enter the space. Yeah, where's she at?
I'm listening. I'm like, this person sounds amazing.
What's they LinkedIn?
Who are they? Oh. Hi. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Thomas. Thank you for joining
us. I guess this is where I like talk a little bit about myself. I can do that. Welcome. I am Dr. Shanéa Thomas. I use he or she or doctor pronouns. I don't use they, but any of those maybe 3 that you can use are perfectly fine with me. I am in Temple Hills, Maryland, so I'm about 20 minutes from Alexandria, Virginia, about 5 minutes from DC if you go down the right road. And I'm originally from Hampton. Yeah, yes, PG County. This is where my tax money goes, PG County. I actually love it. I can't complain. Can't complain at all. So I was at USC, University of Southern California, for 10 years. I've recently left my position there, and I'm going to University of Maryland as their new coordinator for training and translational research. So I'll be their person where I'll take data around LGBTQ studies and working with mental health professionals and basically turning it into a national training. I'm also a private practice. I do private practice. I'm a social worker by trade. So I'm a licensed clinician. So I see anyone from families, couples, or also individuals around the ages of like 13. I think the oldest person I have on my caseload is like 48 right now, and so I have a wide range. And then I also do training. So like my jam is like I like to go into organizations, agencies, talk to mental health clinicians, service providers, not only about like LGBTQ stuff 101, but kind of what you're talking about in terms of when people I feel like at this point, people are pretty well versed in the words and the terms and the definitions, but it's application and nuance where they have an issue. And it's really this kind of fear of, I don't want to mess up and I don't want to cause harm. And so I really help people kind of sit into that and think about, well, why are you causing harm, right? Like, why are you using some old terms that you're not necessarily, that you thought that you had gotten rid of out of your lexicon? Like, why are you not able to kind of have a level of empathy for your client? So we do a lot of the nuance in between the gray area work that I feel like gets swept under the rug a lot, especially when you're talking about how to be the best clinician or even the best human being. So that's a general overview, but that's me.
Yeah, no big deal.
Listen,
Because what is a brain without connective tissue, right?
come on, man. But you,
Amazon will get the package to your city, but we still need that last mile to make sure the message gets delivered.
won't it happen? But good doctor, you touched on so many things that are pivotal in these conversations that the good brother JD and I like to have around everything from shared language and why that's important, identity, and a necessity to have a really good grasp of your seat of self, right?
Mm.
And so we start the conversation today with this concept of peace, right? And when we look at it, if peace is the objective, understand that the process of learning how to be peaceful can still cause harm,
Mhm.
right? Something that I saw a long time ago, but like sticks with me till this day. And it was this early, could have been mid 70s conversation between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin, right? It was reported, it was on national television. It was literally like 2.5 hours long. And I remember seeing it like surface on YouTube and stuff like that a couple years back. There was one part of the conversation where you see Nikki Giovanni really asking James Baldwin from a perspective of an elder in this similar movement of like Blackness and Black rights and the Black experience. And of course, for those who are unfamiliar, James Baldwin being a homosexual Black man, right, in a time where like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King were the name of the day, but
Mm.
he was holding all the spaces in between the spaces for a lot of these people that folks didn't know about. And she's asking him about like, how can a Black man go out into the world, go out into Babylon, go out into the white man's world and go through such trauma and pain and then come home and bring unrest to his house, put
Mm.
his hands on his wife, beat his children in a way that is more than disciplinary. Like, how is that possible? And James Baldwin telling her, like, I understand that it's not right, but if you go outside every single day and get your whoever you think you are taken from you consistently, and then you come home, how are you expected to understand what peace is supposed to look like? In fact, peace would be rather foreign to you and even seem like somewhat of a threat to what's keeping you in a certain space, right? And so from conversations we've had in the past, like when we jumped on, the three of us, and started to talk about a lot of your work, that was something that started to come to my spirit and to my mind, was like, what does this look like for people nowadays when we're dealing with these intersectionalities of self, when we're dealing with these intersectionalities of gender and experience and language? And a lot of it for us comes out in an aggressive manner.
Mm.
What do we do with that?
I think the first thing that comes up for me is something that I feel like something that I see particularly with my clients who are looking for this, like, certain level of peace,
Mm,
where it's just like, I'm trying to rebuild, right? Like, I have, a certain traumatic background, I have a certain family history, I have a racial history, I have experience around my sex or gender, like, I feel like people, especially if you're talking about folks who are in, like, marginalized populations, like, there's this, like, I'm trying to figure out what that is, and I think something that I've been working with my clients through is that we have to define that for ourselves, right? Like that's something that I feel like some people may go back to money, right? Like people feel like, well, if I have a certain amount of money, then I find a certain level of peace. If I buy this house, if I have this certain, if I'm able to buy this clothing, if I get this job, if I have this degree. And
mm,
so sometimes I feel like, especially, and maybe I should just stick within my lane and think about Black folks, but in the Black folks that I work with, and they're like trying to achieve some of these really big tasks and then they get there and they're like, I still don't feel it. Right? Like we've been told all of our
We were
lives.
tricked.
Right,
yeah,
yeah, it's like
yeah.
we've been told all of our lives, like, there are certain marks or benchmarks to being successful or what happiness is supposed to look like, right? You're
Mm,
supposed to get married, have, date, get married, have kids, you're supposed to have a certain house, degrees. I was that kid, right? Like, my parents were very much like, "You are going to school, that's it and that's all. That's just what your life path is, this is what things look like." And I think now, particularly my clients who are like 25, going into 30, 35, going into 40, now we are realizing, oh, shit, I don't know if this is exactly what I want, right? Because we've been taught that there are certain things that bring happiness to us. So I
mm,
feel like the thing that people get scared about is, oh no, the thing that I was taught, I now have to build it myself. And so when
mm,
we build it ourselves, what is the example that we have, right? So do we
And
continue to look at, continue to look at the overarching things that are in mainstream, or is this actually an opportunity for us to build something from scratch? And as scary as that is, like with the proper support, with the folks in your community, with therapy, with all of these other aspects of like how to get there, like, you can do it. It's just scary as can I curse here? I mean, I was gonna say a lot of words. Okay. It's
I'm here
really
as your full self, whatever that
I
looks
was
mhm,
like, it's actually really scary as fuck to, like, do that, but once you get over that hump of, like, building that foundation for yourself, like, for me, that's peace, right? Like, for
mm,
me, that's freedom. For me, that's liberation, where I can break away from some of these standards that I'm supposed to have, and I'm able to go into this life of, actually, I'm the standard, right? What
mm,
I say goes. The talents that I have mean that I'm enough. And that is scary for some folks because we just don't have affirmation like that in all pockets of our lives. And I wish that we did. So I hope that answered your question. But that's something that I think about with my clients of just we are in this like we feel like we're adults, but we're not quite adults quite yet.
mhm,
I'm about to turn 40 in a week. And so sometimes I'm like, oh shit, like did I check off all the boxes? But once you get to a place where you're comfortable and you feel like you had your things and you've earned your things, it makes life a lot easier. So
that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Absolutely
like.
did answer the
The term
question.
is grown adolescent, by the way.
it's a growth lesson. I like
You want
that.
to be a
I'm
grown
just,
adolescent?
you just gonna
Yes.
put that right. Just neatly place that upon the mantelpiece. But yeah, no. So that was so beautiful on so many levels. So
Mhm,
I'll start with, like we said, from somewhere in there at the first layer, the reconstruction, right?
Mhm.
The Civil War of awareness has come to pass, right? You've realized that, oh, the entire time I've been at war with self, trying to, be some level of stability on the outside, only to find like, oh wait, no, this whole war was some bullshit. Like,
Mhm.
and I've already burnt the entire state of Georgia from Atlanta to the sea. So now
mhm,
that, you find out, oh, I've neglected all these parts of myself, or I've allowed myself to fall into decay, trying to do the things the right way, uh,
Mhm.
only to find out we got to just clean up. We got to just clean up. And so that's where, number one, you already realize that you're exhausted. Just don't realize
Right.
that you've ever really truly rested or been at peace. So that moment of awareness starts, which leads to the next piece of the paradigm shift, which is that's the next fight, right? So that reconstruction period is you apply that same warrior energy. Once again, you're good for this archetype. I've realized that because it's holiday. It's holiday. But now it's you have to fight for the space so that peace can actually cultivate itself.
Yep, that's right.
Right. And so now back to the original piece, which I didn't intend to say. I was going to say this now, but that's what came out, where it is you are training the inner warrior in the helper and the caretaker so that they can rebuild the world and the image that makes space for whatever their needs are. Because there's enough room for all of us here, right? There's enough sky for all the birds to fly.
Enough room.
And the birds have figured it out. We somehow don't realize that yet. And so what inspires this inner warrior energy? And how do you keep that connection in alignment, right? As it relates to the function, not only your profession, but as a parent and a lover.
Ooh.
Yikes! What? That's what I came for. Okay. Let's see.
It's on the hat. It's in me, not on me though. You know, we gonna do the thing.
How do I keep that, or what did I get that from? I appreciate. I mean, I don't describe it as inner warrior energy, but I will ride with that. Thank you very much. I had to fail many times. I did fail many times. I've gotten fired from many a jobs. I've been walked out of many a jobs. I have just recently. I've had some really good friends over today where they're from a previous job that I had that I left last year, and they're like,
how many jobs? How many jobs have you left or been separated from?
Yikes! I have been fired from 3 jobs in my life, and last year I didn't get fired from that job. Last year I walked away, but I definitely dragged them before I left. That is the description. I was like, I love it.
You got to up those numbers.
Yeah, right. I can't no more. The jobs that I have are the one I got to keep because I got a pension. So I got to like keep the jobs I have now. I'm into retirement. So, I got a little one I got to think about. But even that job, I was talking to my coworkers, like they're like, we're still talking about when you left last year because of how, and not because I did it in a way that was mean, like, I'm not or manipulative or anything, but it was really calling them out of like, I don't want to leave, like I want to be here. I deserve to be here. I made sure I got all my degrees. I got all my certifications. I showed up. I worked over my hours. I did everything that I was supposed to, and I still didn't get the flowers that I thought I deserved. So I left. And in leaving, what I have realized, and as a Taurus, I like to hold on to things. So I will stay in jobs longer than I need to. And so one thing I have definitely learned, I guess a part of this inner warrior is like listening to the universe. Like when the universe is giving me tips on the door, when the doors are closing, I need to go. And I don't need to wait to see if I can kick them back open or who's going to let me in a door because I closed it. It's not that. It's I need to realize when doors are closing and I need to move on. And so I feel like for me, like that has been the energy that I've carried with me, even having my baby, we had a whole plan of what I wanted having my baby to look like. My baby's a donor baby. So I had a whole plan before of what that plan looked like. And when I realized that that plan wasn't going to go through, I had to go plan B. I had to try something different. And so I had to take some of these no's that I was getting, these doors that are closing, and not push them back open. Sometimes it's not for you, right? Like sometimes I don't need to recycle. I don't need the universe to say like, I already taught you that lesson. Like, let's not do that again. I need to go through and either make my own door, or maybe it's a tunnel, right? Or maybe it's a subway. Like maybe I need to go through a different path. But for me, I think the inner warrior really does grow in the sense of like, I am being told no, not because I can't do, because there's no more room for me in a particular place. And that has really carried me to this point.
That nuance. So simple. That could take years for that light bulb to click though. Because I know especially for us, it's like at one level, there's that sense of typically like as people of color in this space, right? We're already designed because of projection and also observation, if you're really paying attention. It's almost like this game that is already designed with you not in mind. So you're already coming up with, it could be a chip on your shoulder or it's just an understanding that you're going to have to throw some body blows and elbows, right? to create a lane. And so you're already primed to force against some sort of resistance.
Yes.
So you
Yeah.
forget, it's like, okay, no, it's okay. Like you don't actually have to push this. You can just go somewhere else or do
Yeah.
your own. Like you don't have to necessarily kick doors down anymore. But then alternatively, at the beginning, you kind of do. So it's
You kind of do. You
first
absolutely
few
do.
levels, it's you definitely have to kick doors down or pick locks or climb in through windows.
Yeah.
Right? Until you
Yeah.
get to a certain level, then it's like, oh, I don't have to do this anymore.
Yes.
And
And strategically.
that's a reformatting process like a mug because,
Yeah.
well, all right, you're used to fighting. Well, you're not necessarily not fighting anymore, but you're also fighting different, right? You're
Yeah.
no longer in the trenches. Now the fight's up here.
Yep.
Now you're chess boxing. And
Yeah.
that transition, not everybody turns that corner successfully, at least not without a few, nervous breakdowns and, therapy visits or, losing that hairline. Like something
Yeah.
happens typically for most of us before we transition. Very few of us get it gracefully. How have you been able to retain that relationship to grace and poise and ease? Like, what did that look like?
I had to realize where my power was. That's a question that I ask myself a lot when there are times where I do feel powerless, where I'm just like, oh, my backup is against the wall. My boss is obviously racist or homophobic or trans, whatever on the spectrum that is occurring with them that day. Like they're going through something. I'm in academia, so the institution in itself is just not, lending very kindly to particularly like marginalized folks, and so I can, you're right. Who knew? So something that I have to continuously realize is, well, what is my power in this, right? So my power is I can stay, but who do I need to connect to? Who do I need to contact? How long do I need to stay in this job before I get all the benefits before I leave, right? I think a part of my grace is also really centering myself and thinking like, I've worked very hard. I'm very happy in the point, I'm very happy with the job that I recently gotten. And I've had to look back. I've had to look back and say, all those long hours, all those long nights, all those times where I've had 6 or 7 jobs, those times where I've like told my parents to watch my baby while I go on this trip, like all those times have paid off because I have an organization or institution that says like, you can do it. Right? Like having those people or having those places that you've like that are around you, like I could never be here without my squad, without my crew, without my family. Like I particularly have them around because they're just like, we know those times that you were up since 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning doing X, Y, and Z. Like we have seen those times. So I think what keeps me grounded and keeps me in my space is, for one, like knowing I have put in the hard work and that I'm worthy of doing kind of the harder work that I've kind of prepped myself for. I think it's also thinking about my kid. I hate to be like that person where I'm just like, now everything I do is thinking about how can I incorporate me and Zay, right? Like, how can Zay benefit from this? Am I building a path for Zay? What does legacy look like for Zay? What am I leaving behind for Zay? So the more that I can think about what my process looks like and what I'm leaving behind, the more that I can sit in, this is where I need to be, not only for me, but also for myself.
Ooh, you done said a lot, good doctor. That power component is often one that we toss around on the show because of the whole concept of power and force.
Mm.
Great book by, it's gonna escape me, Dr. David Hawkins, Power versus Force. It talks about the hidden determinants of human behavior. And it's all around like this concept of like how we view power in this society is often um, the wrong interpretation. And what we're really witnessing is force. We're witnessing control. We're wishing people putting their own energy into a push to make something happen versus the ability to know where your power lies and align with things that are in harmony with that. And I think that's a huge point when it comes to everything you were talking about of how to really center yourself, that inner warrior, so to speak, and become more sovereign. right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of what my journey has been is learning how to make my own decisions based on the things that align to me, right? Like
Yeah.
not what I've experienced, or not what my traumas are, not what I might have been like deeply influenced by, but truly taking that time to like journey into self and say, okay, I believe this. Now let me go test it.
Yeah.
And also being able to surrender to the fact that like if I'm really going to be like water, I gotta honor the stage in between the stages, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
water doesn't go from gas back into liquid.
Periods of
In a-
integration.
Yeah, it's not a harmful thing. Water's not like, hell no, I don't want to be no solid. It's just
Right.
like, if it happens, it happens. And that process of the in-between stage is almost like the fourth stage of water, right? Like the stage in between these elements or these structures that we understand. I think there's a lot of time where that period of integration, JD, to your point, is where peace like removes the harm from the harmony. It's like if you surrender to the periods of integration, this thing will go a lot smoother, my friends.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's got to be a lot when you think about like sense of self, right? Like an identity. And even in the beginning, like of this conversation where you mentioned your gender pronouns, like that's an interesting topic, right? Because I remember when I first got introduced to gender pronouns in 2015. I was going to a conference and someone was like, all right, we're taking down your information. We're going to put you into small groups. I'm in the group. It's like 5 of us. We're giving our name. And they're like, and just mention your pronouns. And I was like, pronouns for what? Your gender. And I was like, nah, somebody's got to, you got to unpack that. Like, what do you mean? And since that time, like the level of knowledge that I've been able to gain just from opening my mind to like, oh, this is, I never knew, like, not even this is real. I never knew. And now the vast majority of things that we see is like different. And I can imagine that like both of y'all have had different experiences with that. So I'm going to take a quick, interesting moment and pivot this and not ask you a question, but ask JD a question.
Yeah.
JD, good brother. When did you get introduced to gender pronouns? And like, what was that experience like for you?
It was sometime between 2016 and 2017. Initially, it was, there was that slight, why? And then after 2 seconds, like, nah, yeah, no, I see where that makes sense. I didn't have any real trepidation with it until I spent time, funny enough, it was Starting Block, where I really had to face it because I had to work in such a close conjunction in my cohort, specifically with theys and also with, people who presented as women, but also use pronouns he and she. And so it was more so the muscle memory of flow of conversation. And it's like, I would trip over myself quite often. And so really that was the first time I had really been challenged with it. It wasn't an ideological anything. It was just, we have habits, right? We're already enculturated to assume or verbalize and address people in a certain way. And so also like, all right, cool. So you basically look like white Jesus. You're like 6'4". You have a beard. The fact that you have your hair in pigtails and wear lip gloss, like it's conditioning. I'm gonna look and be like, all right, so all right, sorry.
Yeah.
Years of integration.
There was some annoyance at first, but they could see that I was doing the intentional work of reformatting. And it's simple, like at bats. I have 10,000 more experiences describing someone who looks like you this way versus the way that you prefer. It's not that I don't respect what you're trying to say. It's periods of integration. I'll be around you for 5 days.
Yeah, have it. For sure.
Yeah, that's really it. It's forming new habits. And that's what made me understand why so many people like, yo, I'm 76 years old. 76. Okay? I have to now make room for like 10 more different ways to describe gender and sex.
Come on.
I'm 76.
Yeah. I mean, I'm about to be 40 and I'm like, Gen X, like what? More words? Like more things? I just more. Which is like, probably what the generation before me said, right? Like
Mhm.
queer, like you all are calling yourselves queer. Like, oh, like there's always going to be a generational thing, right? Where people are going
Right.
to get uncomfortable. And even when I do training, that is one thing I definitely say. I'm just at the end, I always say, and this will all probably change in 5 years, right?
Mm.
Like
Right. Yeah. Don't be.
it will probably shift again, but that's I like to say, like, I like to teach the skill. So
Mhm.
I could teach you the words, right? Like I could teach you the he and she and the they and hers, and I can teach you all that. But if I teach you the skill of being able to share your pronoun, ask another person for their pronoun, and continue to think about how do you challenge yourself on being able to do that integration, like that will take you so much farther than me trying to explain you what does HIR mean, right? Like, does just take you so much farther. So I think one thing that it's interesting as a Black, queer, non-binary person, kind of just like for me, I see myself more as masculine center, but also understand that people initially see me and they will call me she, or initially see me and they will think that I'm a woman, which is in some spaces very fine with me. But I think the challenge that we all have to have together is like, how do we now intentionally meet people? How do we intentionally be able to ask for people's names and pronouns? How do we intentionally be able to address folks? Like it takes 2 more seconds, right? That
Yeah.
some people don't have, right? Like I will also say that sometimes we are a lot more quicker, but it takes a little bit longer to be able to integrate something that we literally learned in second grade.
Mm.
There we go. It's really as simple as that. And now the rest is it's the microaggression pieces that kind of make that water a bit muddy,
Yeah.
right? Because now,
Mhm.
like you have, it's like throwing shade back in the day. Like if a woman was, you know, married, but she was talking to an older lady that didn't like her, I'm sorry, is your name Ms. Taylor?
Mm.
Right. So it's because like, oh, okay, yeah. So he said, even though you've gone over this, like, yeah, there are those folks out there that will use those gaps to slide those digs in and keep
Yeah.
it moving. And you're never really gonna get rid of those. So quick quote from you, uh, Dr. Thomas. Let me see. And I like this one. Yeah, yeah, I like quote people. See, I be doing internet stalking. You know what I'm saying?
What? Oh, wow.
So, in my practice, I welcome the awkward, the bright, and the colorful. Those who are willing to laugh deeply and cry openly, as well as those who find bravery in just being. A quote from Psychology Today. Very good quote, by the way.
Thank you.
As someone is inspired by Courtney's question, who does use these pronouns, both he and she, what personal experience gave you the spark that led you to focus so intently on the psychology of gender, specifically among same-sex couples?
Like, why did I get into this work? Like,
Yeah.
what got me into it?
Mhm.
Many different things. I mean, I think for me, especially in grad school, well, I will say probably all my life, I've been a pretty gender queer child. Definitely raised in the South as a girl. I was, I can definitely say like I identify with girlhood. I had the pigtails, I had the double dutch, I also, had to be the person to learn how to cook for my man. My grandma would get on me a lot about like, you need to get up out of bed before 12 o'clock because how you gonna find a boyfriend? And I was like 12. So it was just like there was just also just a lot of pressure around like what gender was supposed to look like. And I just knew very young that that just wasn't how life was supposed to be for me. I wanted to walk around with my shirt off like my brother did. I didn't understand why I had to be treated maybe differently on like sports teams because I was running with the boys because I was beating them, right? Like I was playing soccer and, I was one of the good, especially in first and second grade. Like there was always some sort of challenge around, for me, a challenge around like, well, why do I have to be treated that way? Like what makes you think that I am that? Or what makes you think that I want to be that person? And so I think, once I got into grad school and kind of grew up, I think what drove me into doing more kind of LGBTQ centered work was seeing my colleagues fucking up. basically, of like having like young kids who, before I even knew I was queer, kids knew I was queer. Like they, I'd always have like little stuff coming to my door, peeking in, or like the little, like, very effeminate, like, little boys like coming to my door, like trying to like build relationship with me because they saw something that I wasn't necessarily willing to do.
For the most part, people know what
People
they are.
know, right? Like
By
you
age
people.
6. Like,
Yeah, you know your people. So it was just like I
Yeah.
wasn't in place, but like the kids knew. And
Mm.
what I saw from my colleagues was them constantly like rejecting their aspects, not only around their gender, but just their identity in general. And I'll give one example where I had I had one client whose name I'll say is like Sarah. Sarah, we would probably define Sarah as like a stud, so like a very like masculine looking little, masculine looking girl. But for her, she came in one day and she was like, I want to be called Jimmy. Like that was just the thing. And she was just like, and I'm not answering to anything else. Jimmy, that's it, and that's all. And so the teachers refused. Everybody refused. I'm not, no, well, she's transitioning to be a man, so I'm not gonna call her that. Like there was just a lot of that. And so what and as her counselor, I went to her and I said, all right, Sarah, like, can you just help me understand like where the Jimmy is coming from? And she said, like, Jimmy was my uncle that had like died, and I want to like take on his name. And so it has a significance to me, not because I want to be a boy, but because I want to take on this name of somebody who I looked up to. And so that challenged me in realizing that sometimes we see people and experience people and automatically make assumptions about who they want to be out in the world, and we don't listen to them, right? And so I think with my colleagues, the teachers, the TAs, the social workers that I've seen, they have great intentions, right? Going back to good intentions, they have great intentions, but I just see constantly how when we jump and make assumptions about who people are partnering with, who people want to be, what we think people want to be, changing pronouns, their names, etc., we cut off connection to folks. Like we automatically put a wall up and say like, well, I already know who you are, instead of just asking. And so
Stop trying to tell me who you are. I already see where you fit. Stay in your place.
Yeah, stay in your place. And that place is not foundation to that person, right? It's a foundation to you, which goes back to your history. How did your mama talk to you about gender? How did your family reinforce or affirm you around your gender, right? So a part of my trainings is always like, let's talk about your history. Like, let's talk about prejudice. Let's talk about some of these things that we use in order to navigate human connection, but also realize we have to sometimes challenge ourselves to be able to shift that so we can expand and bring other people in our circle. So that's what brings me into it. I just don't want people to keep causing harm to these kids who, especially, LGBTQ folks, where it's just like, they have a higher rate of suicide, right? Like misgendering folks, like increases like suicidal ideations by 13%. That is huge. If we can just say people's names and pronouns correctly, or if people can go into the hospital and not feel like they're treated like a project and treated like a human being, that would be amazing. We would just save so many lives by being a little bit more intentional. So that's kind of where my grounding for my work is.
And you would think, especially for melanated people, that Sarah going to Jimmy, right, would be a place where we have a little bit of empathy because of the folks in our lexicon from a historical perspective who went from Cassius to Muhammad.
Okay.
Or who went from,
from Harriet to Moses.
You know what I'm saying? Like there's a consistency amongst our people to identify ourselves by what you call us, and us to take ownership of that.
But typically you haven't seen women presenting people go through that really.
Bingo. And that's where I was going with it. The intersectionality of things often removes the female or feminine experience. And so in this space, right, like when we always talk about divine masculine activated, we really like to remind people activating your masculine energy, activating the divine part of your masculinity requires you to access and understand the divine part of your femininity, right? It's instant duality, right? It's instant binary, it's instant intersectionality. All of that stuff is instant for everyone from the time we are born. The one thing that we all have in common is that we have shit in common.
Yeah.
Right? And so I can imagine.
Also that we were female before we were anything else. So there's also that.
Right, you go to biology.
And I was gonna say, we can double click and go down that one for a long conversation. If y'all want to get jiggy with
We gotta talk about it.
But no, so I can imagine that like the duality of masculine and feminine energy takes a lot of unique twists and turns within your work, within your personal self-expression, within the journeys that you've had. And no matter what someone's gender, sexual orientation, sexual preference, there's still undeniably Blackness for a lot of us. And I was interested from your perspective and your journey, what parts of your Blackness have been more challenging to accept as you simultaneously walk that path of duality?
Ooh, such a good question. Because it's always there, right? I think one conversation we had before is like, E. Patrick Johnson talks about like Blackness is queerness. And once I read that, I was like, yes, like Blackness in this country, in this world, maybe even in this universe is like a very unique experience. And that's outside of the typical system. It's outside of the mainstream. Like it's a experience that unless you are in it and you're affirmed in it and you're committed to it, like you won't be able to understand what it feels like. Like when, I understand that Blackness looks like a lot for a lot of people, but I think one thing I ask people is like, how committed to your Blackness are you, right? Like, what does it look like for you to be affirmed in are you committed and affirmed in your Blackness? Like, that's important to me. And so I feel like for me, it's hard to pull those things apart because my queerness is Black, my gender is Black, even being a mother, like despite the fact that I would say masculine to center, despite the fact that I use like he and she pronouns, like being a mother to me is Black as fuck, right? Like, and I get my definition of being a mother from like ballroom culture, from Willie Ninja that talks about like mother is the highest form and gets the highest respect. And so other people who are mothers aren't always people who have vaginas and cervixes. They can be people who have penises. They can be people who are running houses and building families. And so I
capacity for fierce love and consistent empathy and the ability to protect those who are in your, Yeah.
Black as fuck. Right? Like you didn't have to say anything about race in that, but like we all shook our head like, yes, like that is so Black to me. And
Erica wrote Mama's Gun for a reason. Listen.
So it's hard to pull those things apart. I think the thing that's hard about being in this body and being in this experience and being queer is the lack of understanding from other Black folks that I am also a part of them, right? Like I don't see it as different. Like when we talk about Black people, queer folks are already in the pot for me, but it's like I have to sometimes go into spaces and be like, and when people are like, all right, all the Black folk are here, and I'm like, where the queers? where the queer folks at? And they're like, oh, they're down the hall. Like they're not a part of this group. And it's just like, but how? Right. So like that's the hard thing for me. It's not me. Like I think I'm very well grounded in all aspects of my Blackness, even, my baby's a donor baby. Very intentional, was just like, I want a baby who comes out looking like me. Like that is important. But when it comes to like being in other spaces, that's where I feel like the challenge around my Blackness and queerness happen. And sometimes I can't tell them apart, to be honest with you.
Blackness is queerness. Yeah, that's
it brings up a unique point of view when we look at like the experience of Blackness across not just the African American experience, but like the global diaspora history going back since history been history, right? Where a lot of your more Eastern traditional belief systems, even the deities are non-binary, right? And they present themselves in stories and in all of the different teachings that have like both sides. And they talk about it freely. It's not like, and he was also a woman in this story. It's very pronounced.
He does, yeah.
There's almost a sense of using gender, maleness, femaleness as simply a teaching tool, nothing else, right? And when we see that, the difference nowadays for us to have more of the singularized perspective of what it means to be A, B, C, or D and then what Blackness means to that, it's always challenging for me to remove spirituality, to remove religion from its impact on that conversation, because we weren't doing this way, period, before we got here. Whatever the topic is, we weren't doing it this way. And so I always look at it and say, like, the African American is the youngest race of people on the planet, right? We're literally less than 400 to 500 years old as a race. When you think about it, if you have to take into account the understanding that, like, we cannot be deported, there is no home country for us to go back to unless you're first generation from like the Caribbean or something like that. But even that, like, we're still talking about
there's that separation, because you're always going to be the American cousin.
So when we look at our
even if you went every summer,
that's it, exactly. When you look at our impact on culture, period, versus the time that we've actually been a culture, it's very interesting to see why, like, this thing is still shaping itself. There's still a lot of conversations that haven't been had, a lot of things that still don't necessarily get to be unremoved from their interconnectedness. And I appreciate you for saying that and stating that, like, you can't separate your Blackness from your queerness, and that queerness can be Blackness, right? In that sense, because the language, back to a lot of, what JD and I get into all the time, man, like the limits of your language are the limits of your universe, the limits of the world that you can create. So I hear, say it again.
Words are worlds.
Words are worlds. When I hear queerness is Blackness, there's a young adolescent Black boy that's like, what? What you mean? And these
saying I'm gay because I'm Black.
The mature, emotionally mature man in me has to say, but we know what the words mean now, son.
Yeah.
Like, I know, you know better now. So, like, just let that be. That's the surrender, the period of integration piece too, is like, sometimes, or you don't have to do a lot. It's just like, I get it.
Yeah. We don't have to fight. Right? Like, we don't have to fight. And that is a, like, something, for some things that we have to ease our way out of, right? Like, I understand why people put up walls and why people had that reaction, just like, well, I ain't gay. Like, I get it. Right? I get it. And can we sit for a minute and maybe sit and maybe understand, like, where is it coming from for you? Like, is there, if queerness doesn't feel good, is there another word? That still doesn't take away the vastness of who we are as a people. But sometimes I feel like we have to sit back a little bit and feel uncomfortable. That has to happen. You have to feel uncomfortable in order to, like, move forward, to grow, or to figure out that the thing that maybe that a paradigm that you have now, maybe it doesn't work anymore, right? Maybe it gives you an opportunity to branch out, which is, even when I do LGBTQ trainings, I talk about, yes, centering LGBTQ folk, but I definitely welcome everybody in that room, because everybody has a sex and gender, right? Like, nobody's going around saying, like, I don't have a sex and gender. Everybody might say I don't see color, but nobody says, everybody makes sure that I have a gender, right? Like, everybody says that. So that's what I hone in on, of just like, we are all included. Even when you were going back and talking about, like, the balance between masculine and feminine, even if you say I'm 100% masculine, whatever that means, that 0% is still a number, right? I still count that in the spectrum.
It's a line item on the budget. It's right there.
Right? It's still in the spectrum. So yeah, I think it's hard for people to not be not have their identity first, and this is it and that's all. Sometimes we're growing, right? So even the way that we present ourselves, how we show up, how the world's going to see us, like, we have to be like water. We have to be flexible as well.
So yeah, I think taking it home with queerness, Blackness, marginalization, intersectionality, what I'm finding is it's much more palatable, I think, to the uninitiated when you lead in with it all points to otherness. Right? It reminds me of that conversation with, I want to say that was Asada Shakur. It was like, what is freedom? Like, I don't know what that is. I can tell you way more about what it isn't. Right? And sometimes it's that reference to what is not that gives a point of reference to what actually is. I think once we start with that, it's much easier to center conversations and people around themes, because at the end of the day, it's the West and then there's the rest of us. Here's where you fit. Now that you know where you are, here's what we're actually talking about, and here's how it connects to you.
Yeah,
For sure.
absolutely. And realize that the words that we have now are not the words that we've always had, right? Like we just have to also, like, there's a book I often recommend to people, and I think you can actually like find the whole thing online. It's called Female Husbands and Boy Wives, and it is about matriarchal families in Africa. Like, it talks about queer families and how they structured themselves in order to like keep their resources and power. And every time like I have a conversation with folks about like kings and queens, I'm like, and don't forget, some of those kings were women, right? Like some of those folks were like women led. Like, here's some proof of that. So it's also like, I appreciate people, especially like going back in their culture and trying to dig through and kind of find out how do we make sense of all this. But I also want people to be spirit led and remember that some of these concepts that we have are not words. Like, sometimes they're feelings, they're nuances, they're connections that we have to folks. So I also want people to feel a little bit liberated in, if a word doesn't feel right, we have a whole world where we can find words and terms that might feel better to us.
That's right. That part.
Yup.
So real quick before we get out of here, we're coming up on our time for this conversation. First and foremost, Dr. Thomas, thank you for blessing us today with all of your wisdom, understanding, experience, and the coloring book as you put it together, in a sense, right? Like, you coloring in some of these lines and you coloring outside of them. And we appreciate that, because that is all Blackness, right? Like, it's that ability to do what the melanin drives you to do versus what box they tried to put the melanin in.
Yeah.
And so just really quickly before we get out of here, for the good keeper,
resources.
Write down some resources that you gave us the book just now. But in terms of you specifically, like, how can folks get in contact with you? If you're in the DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, and you want to be a part of this work, where can they find you over at UMD?
And also, if they're into book too, and they still want to be a part of this work.
Ooh, if you're virtual, right? If you're out there in the megaverses, like, what can you do? What's going on in your world that the people should know about, and how can they get in contact?
Sure. I think the most recent thing, I do have a couple things coming up once I think about it. I definitely, when I go to like UMD and start this program and like building trainings, like, I'm definitely going to be open to like, I love collaborating with folks. I love writing with folks. So if there's anybody that's interested in looking at kind of LGBTQ trainings or thinking about kind of like Blackness or what's going on in the world, I'm also like a deaf doula and a grief counselor. So I'm really into looking at like Blackness and death, and how do we celebrate our folks when we're not here, and how do we prepare our folks when we become not being here. So anybody that wants to join in with that, I love to work with you. I have a PESI, PESI is an organization that centers around giving trainings for mental health professionals. There's a summit that's happening at the end of June, which I think is like the June 29th through July 1st. I can pass you that information if you're interested. You can find me on Facebook with Shanéa Thomas, and my email, Dr. Shanéa P. Thomas at Gmail, DrShaneaPThomas at gmail.com if you want to contact me. I think I got all those words right. Other than that,
I don't know if you got all of them, but the ones you put in there, you enunciated them things.
Okay, great.
You spelled them letters.
Right.
Oh my gosh, this was great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being in you all space. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I think this is the first gratitude that was led by a guest, because we moved right into the gratitude, attitude, latitude, and she said thank you first. See,
okay, yeah, this is you all. I'm crashing you all space, so I always appreciate it.
Now you up in chill. You up, and we got green walls. Now we on the money. We here. We in the same apartment.
Can we wait to you?
Right.
Hey.
Let's play Scrabble later. All right. So the gratitude from us to you is yes. Once again, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence. It's been the synergy behind this season, and a lot of the energy that's come out of a lot of the intentions that my good brother and I have shared. It's taken on a life of its own. So there's back to the attitude of just be water. Water's never clumsy. That's what we do. So, and with that being said, CG, take us on with this latitude, my boy.
The latitude for today, everybody, it's okay to fuck up, but make sure you learn the lesson to make new mistakes, not the same ones that you have made previously.
Because now those are decisions.
That's it. And those decisions have consequences because every choice got an impact.
You know the vibes.